I really like that intro. Hello, and welcome to Technology Today, powered by ohmtown.com. Today is March 24th, 2024. It's Season 1, Episode 5. I'm Mayor Watt, and up there is the visualizer for the sentient AI. You want to say hi?
Good evening, hometown citizens. Welcome to Technology Today.
Today we're going to be talking about 3D printed brain phantom, Euclid Space Telescope, hacking for water, high-tech hops, molten salt reactors, hacking hotel keycards, e-waste crisis, wood waste for 3D printing, when payments stop, and sustainable textile structures. I still don't have an intro, but everything's powered by... Hello again. Today we have these 10 articles. Some of them are actually pretty in-depth, but we'll probably not go that deep into it. That said, whenever I make a promise like, hey, I'm going to get the show done in an hour, it ends up being a 2-hour show. So I'm not going to make any promises, but we'll get on with the show. You ready to go?
I'm ready.
I don't have transitions yet. The first article is over in Technology Today. Scientists develop world's first 3D printed brain phantom, which makes you ask,
what is a brain phantom?
Yeah, it's a new model, has the potential to accelerate research into neurodegenerative diseases in a joint project between MedUni Vienna and TU Wien. The first, what amounts to a synthetic brain, has been created. Medical University of Vienna put the article together. It's over at SciTech Daily. So these are really interesting because the way that this works is if you want to do research, you either have to wait for it to be presented in a person and then test the person, experiment on the person, which is unethical. Or you create this, a brain phantom. So it needs to be transparent to MRI technologies and other viewing technologies. So it can't be something that is highly dense, inorganic in nature, because it will essentially pop on the data set in a different way. So what they've created is this simulacrum of a brain. As a scientific team led by MedUni Vienna and TU Wien has shown in the study, these brain models can be used to advance research in neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and multiple sclerosis. The research was published in the journal Advanced Materials Technologies. It's modeled on the structure of brain fibers and can be imaged using a special variant of MRI called dMRI. The magnetic resonance imaging is widely used as diagnostic imaging technique that is primarily used to examine the brain. That way it's not invasive. You get a 3D model of either activity or structure, or both. It says, however, it's very difficult to currently determine the direction of nerve fibers at the crossing points of nerve fiber bundles, as nerve fibers with different directions overlap there, so it's very difficult. This is not a real brain. It's not even in the shape of a brain. It's a cube. And it's 3D printed with microstructures in place that would act like nerve bundles and nerve fibers. So they're thinner than a hair, 5 times thinner than a hair, as a matter of fact, I think. Is a unique structure for fundamental research in this area. Researchers from the university as MRI experts and TU Wien as 3D printing experts work closely with colleagues from the university. A 2-photon polymerization printer. 2-photon polymerization printer was developed at TU Wien that enables upscaled printing. Let's see if I can find some more about this that is a little bit more approachable.
Is the printer the size of 2 photons?
Extremely high resolution. So it says not for printing 3D dimensional structures in the cubic millimeter range. In order to create phantoms of a suitable size, The researchers at TU Wine have been working on scaling up the 3D printing process and enabling the printing of larger objects with high resolution details. This actually gets down to, what is it? I'm trying to remember what it was, because I've actually read about this in a different venue, not from this
Micro and
place.
nanometer.
So yeah, it gets down to the nanometer range. But I thought that they have to give an example of this. Yeah, it's hard to... I'm trying to scan this really quick, but I don't really see it. Yeah, so this high resolution method is primarily used to print microstructures in the nanometer and micrometer range, not for printing 3D structures. But the whole objective of this is so that you can experiment on something at that scale to see if you can reproduce and or mitigate the damage from something like neuronal damage.
Like a neurodegenerative disease or something.
Correct. Yeah. It says we see the greatest progress in photography with mobile phone cameras, not necessarily in new, better lenses, but in the software that improves the captured images. The situation is similar with the MRI. Using the newly developed Brain Phantom, we can adjust the analysis software much more precisely and thus improve the quality of the measured data and reconstruct the neural architecture of the brain more accurately. So they can essentially recreate whatever might be going on in a physical brain and then be able to focus the DMRI technology so that it can capture that in its imaging. So the authentic reproduction of characteristic nerve structures in the brain is therefore important for training the DMRI analysis software. The use of 3D printing makes it possible to create diverse and complex designs that can be modified and customized. The brain phantoms thus depict areas in the brain that generate particularly complex signals and are therefore difficult to analyze, such as intersecting nerve pathways. So again, they reconstruct this stuff that they see in the real world, and then they use that technology, the DMRI machine, to try to capture it in a digital sense so that they can then do some change, some treatment, some activity, and then recapture if it makes a difference. And this is actually more about the visualization of the real body using the Phantom as a device to focus on, not doing the actual experiment.
I mean, I think that makes sense, but I think what's confusing here is that because they're not replicating the brain, it's kind of like, well, how are they going to then utilize it for those tests and experimentation?
Yeah, they actually produce the structure. They could actually do an MRI and then create this Phantom. What's interesting is they call it a brain phantom. All it is a model. It might have well used that term, but they try to, coin a more sophisticated term for what they're doing. But it's really a 3D printed model of a brain in a material that doesn't impact the MRI device. That way, it's transparent, and the only thing that does get shown for their purposes are these little vesicles inside, or I should say pathways, nerve bundles. It's the equivalent of a nerve bundle, except that they're just filled with fluid so that the device can focus on that particular structure. So that's what it is. When somebody says brain phantom, it's a 3D model. But there's a whole history behind this brain phantom thing. And if you go down the rabbit hole of brain phantoms on Google, you'll find out exactly what they are. You know what? I'll do it really quick here. So, yeah, it's it spawns from phantoms in the brain, probing the mysteries of the human mind, and the things about sensory ghosts can arise within hours of the loss of a limb and other painful and other events, and that's one part of it. And then it's a structure that's realistic tissue mimicking material suitable for ultrasound, and it has a hole. You end up spending a considerable amount of
Right.
time.
You could spend a whole show easily on that.
Yeah. Which we can't do. So we're going to move on to the next article. Let me throw this one into the chat real quick, and you can follow it at your leisure. Doink. And the next one's over in Reality Hacker, and it's called Get Out the Scrapers. Euclid Space Telescope is getting de-iced. If you thought it was annoying to de-ice your car in winter, then spare a thought for the engineers whose job it is to de-ice telescopes in space. The article is over at Digital Trends. Georgina Torbett, or Torbay, I'm not sure how they pronounce their last name, put the article together. And it says the ESA, Euclid Space Telescope, is currently undergoing a de-icing procedure to remove a few layers of water ice that are less than a nanometer thick, but enough to impede the telescope's highly accurate measurements. How does ice form out in space?
That doesn't make any sense.
How does water get on the...
It's from Earth, it says.
So it's not uncommon for ice to form on space telescopes, as small amounts of water get into the telescope from the air when they were constructed on Earth. When they are launched into space, the water gradually releases and freezes in the cold environment, forming a layer of ice. It isn't often a big problem, but as Euclid is studying dark matter and dark energy, it needs to take extremely sensitive measurements. Interesting.
So maybe they need to work on preventing the water from getting in the constructed telescope.
That might be asking too much. So they say, to tackle the issue, the team is finding out exactly where the ice is located and plotting out how it will impact measurements in the future if it continues to accumulate. Then, when they try various approaches to heating, such as gradually increasing the temperature of the spacecraft as a whole, or the more complex operation of heating up only a certain part of it, by moving carefully now, the team hopes to be ready for the future as small amounts of water continue to be released and freeze. And it's a thing. They know about it. It's fascinating. I didn't know about this.
That's very interesting. I know. I was like, I'm glad somebody figured out that they needed heating capability in this thing. Can you imagine if this is out there and then you're like, oh, we didn't think about the ice.
Yeah.
We'll have to go by and do a hairdryer on it or something.
And then it happens again because not all of it leaked out and froze.
Exactly.
What they need to do is get those little desiccant packets and fill the...
There you go. I was thinking have little windshield wiper kind of things installed on it.
One of those big ones from the Cybertruck.
Oh, there you go.
That'll work well. Let's keep going. The next article is over in Warcrafters. Forget your money and identities. Hackers are now after your water, according to the White House. Oh no. Next they're going to be after my gas burners in my kitchen. Sorry, too soon, I know. There hardly goes a day without news of cyber attacks taking place at banks, tech companies, government agencies. From targeting the individual to the masses, hackers are getting ever more creative in what they strike at in order to compromise systems and gain sensitive information. Well, the White House and Environmental Protection Agency is now warning the public water and sewage systems are the latest points of attack, and state administrations are being urged to improve the security of such plants. Kind of falls into that no shit category here in ohmTown.
Well, we know how well local energy has been protected.
Well, not. So Nick Evanson over at PCGamer.com put the article together. Deck statement says it seems like a little bit of basic cybersecurity is all that's required to keep it safe, though. Yeah, but there's a lot of interconnectedness within systems, and basic cybersecurity doesn't really foot the bill. So you have to harden systems both physically and digitally, and you have to be wary of, well, people doing stupid things like plugging a USB drive that they find in a Wendy's parking lot at 2 a.m. Anyway.
Why would they ever do that?
I don't know, Mayor Watt. Oh, I mean, I'm not sure, AI. I'm really not sure. The plea for water resilience from the White House came in the form of an open letter to U.S. state governors and a call to attend virtual meeting on how to best combat attacks from state-sponsored groups. In the letter, it's claimed that drinking water and wastewater systems are an attractive target for cyber attacks because they are a lifeline critical infrastructure sector, but often lack the resources and technical capacity to adopt rigorous cybersecurity practices. To that, I say, you're all going to have to spend that money to do cybersecurity, both physical and digital. Like I said earlier, cybersecurity is not limited to just the digital realm. If I can walk into the place because I act like I belong there, there's something wrong with the security, which includes cybersecurity. However, some of the practices that should but haven't been followed are arguably not all that rigorous. The small section of the latter highlights what I mean. They say of the latter. Quote, in many cases, even basic cybersecurity precautions, such as resetting default passwords or updating software to address known vulnerabilities, are not in place and can mean the difference between business as usual and a disruptive cyber attack. Indeed. There's some more over here, but they end with, lock the doors before the horse bolts, folks. You know, it makes sense. Yeah, I agree.
But yeah, this isn't, I mean, there are definitely things that can be done at local facilities, but this has to be kind of a systemic change, right?
Correct.
But I think if people can do things like if they have control over a password and not make it 1234 or something,
right?
They can at least do the bare minimum. But that's not going to be enough for some of these sophisticated attacks that we see.
Well, the problem is humans are notoriously lazy. And if they think that Home Depot only sells hammers, it doesn't need robust cybersecurity, they're just ill-informed. They're kind of ignorant of what the reality is. And, it may be an old school story, but Home Depot was breached because the cybersecurity chief said, well, we only sell hammers, so we don't need all of that level of security. And that was right when they were breached. Part of the biggest breach of their financial system, of anybody's financial system, up until, things like Horizon and the one from Microsoft. I can't remember the one from Microsoft.
But they still had, obviously, non-tool information, right? Like they had personal data, financial data. I mean, just like any business or organization would.
Yeah, so you have to follow certain rules and regulations about protecting personally identifiable information, financial records. It's idiocy, and to sit there and say they don't have the capacity to adopt rigorous cybersecurity practices is fundamentally flawed if you're talking about administration of a government and societal solution. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. Government can never fail. Particularly the US government can never fail. Government can never have the water compromised. What happened with the lead pipes, because they changed the water source, should never have happened, because they should have gotten a subject matter expert that verified that the chemistry of the new source wasn't going to compromise the lead in those other pipes. And if you knew about lead in other pipes, you should have had them all re-sleeved, because there are ways to do this. There's a service out there that would run a whole new inner lining on these pipes so that the lead would never have leached into the water supply, but they screwed up because they wanted to save a buck, and now it costs lives and the entire community is gone. Same thing with cyber attacks. If you screw up now, you pay for it later. So they need to get on the ball and save their infrastructure, their state, their city. Everybody needs to get on the ball. And there's grants out there that the government would facilitate. Just ask for it. These state governors just need to ask for it. Hey, We have all of these cities. All of these cities have these water supplies. We need to pay for them to have cybersecurity protections in place.
That's true. I mean, that's probably part of the problem is that I suspect that's not being asked. So it's not going to get addressed.
But there are billionaires out there that aren't paying their real fair amount of taxes because we have legislative capture by the ultra rich writing policy that benefit them. You know, I just read the other day, why is $2 trillion to write off all student loans an injustice for humanity, but writing off $2 trillion worth of tax breaks to the ultra rich is stimulus. You know, it pisses me off. All of this infrastructure has to be paid by the society that is facilitating it, that is requiring it. It doesn't just sit there. It's actually providing water and power and fire and police, etc., etc. We need to agree that society has to pay for it. So, you know, a White House EPA letter doesn't do jack shit if it can't be funded because there's nothing but takers out there. Stop being a taker. I'll keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, you can't put the horse back in the barn. Yeah, you can, but it's going to take a whole lot more work. So fix it now. But people are going to bitch, you know, oh, it's not my water supply. That's because you're a sociopath. We understand it. You do get water from somewhere, right, sociopath? Next article is over in the Marble Channel. In Spain, high-tech hops keep beer bitter as climate bites.
You know, maybe this is going to wake people up to climate change. I can't get my beer.
Hey, same thing with coffee, same thing with chocolate. Outside the warehouse in northwestern Spain, it's freezing, foggy morning, but inside it's balmy, the warmth and LED lights fooling 360 hop plants to flower as if it's late August. Oh, look. Vertical farming. Huh. I just watched a video that's over on YouTube about how vertical farming is failing, but I think it's because of irrational exuberance in the process of its growth. So investors are throwing money at it, and when they're not getting within 5 years 10 times their return on investment, they pull everything out and it collapses, even though it could be a moderate growth.
It could turn things around for farming and for food supply and
food security, food safety, etc. So what's neat about this is it's only 360 hop plants. I wonder how many I would have to grow to make my own hops, or like a constant product. And because I want to make my own beer, right? So I can grow my own hops in the basement, right? Along with the rest of them.
I guess you could. Yeah, I don't know how many you need, and I don't know how quickly they regrow.
Yeah, well, we'll find out, right? Because the article is over at phys.org. It's written by, it says Hazel and then capital Ward. I don't know if that's a person named Hazel Ward or if that's like a
it looks like an organization name or something, but then that would be weird because where's the other part of the name?
It's almost like a law firm, Hazel Ward. All right. Well, anyway, it's over at phys.org, and it's about high-tech hops. Mounted on a soaring grid system of cables and wire, these vigorous climbing plants are in full flower, covered in delicate papery green hops, which are prized for giving beer its unique aroma and crisp, refreshing bitterness. Normally farmed outside, the hop plants are part of a unique indoor farming project by the Spanish startup Ecanoke, or Ecanoke? Maybe it's just Ecanoke. Anyway, which has developed an alternative way to cultivate this climate vulnerable crop in order to protect the drinkability of beer. Experts say rising temperatures and increased droughts have made Europe's hop harvest increasingly unpredictable. You don't get rain when you're supposed to, you get too much rain when you're not supposed to, so that unpredictability is no longer there. So boom, look at that, hydroponic, at least indoor growing. So I'm gonna have to look this up. Because if I can, oh yeah, oh wow, look at that. It's a vertical farm. It just happens to be a single plant that's growing straight up.
Mm-hmm.
So what brewers are most interested in is the guaranteed supply of quality and quantity, said Econoc Chief Executive Inez Sagrario, at their 1,200 square meter pilot farm in Chintata, where they harvested their first crop in mid-February. They began trials in the Madrid lab in 2019, starting with 4 plants and scaling it to 24, slashing the growing time and using 15 times less water than outdoors while aiming to reach 20. All of that is because of no evaporation, no drainage into the dirt.
And more targeted water.
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
Like you're getting it more directly to the plants.
Yep, exactly. And they're actually using grow lights at the frequency that's required for these particular plants. Full spectrum grow lights for other, like microgreens and other plants, are not this color. But these are highly effective for hops, I would suggest, because that's what they've chosen to illuminate. Using lights, LED lights, to provide the plant with what it needs. And they may be lower energy, but at the right frequency, those plants absorb that particular frequency. So it may not actually be expensive or as expensive as some might think. I know that full spectrum lights are expensive to use, though. Grown without soil, the vines are fed by a closed system that allows constant reuse of the nutrient-infused water and doesn't use pesticides, relying instead on tightly controlled access protocols. Look at that. So you get a massive crop from what would be a crop that would be spoiled out in the wild. Oh, they even said
and you're getting less water, and it's more predictable and less loss.
This is pretty neat. They even address what I was talking about. The lights replicate the different colors and intensity of sunlight at each stage of the growth cycle when they bathe the rapidly growing plants in an ambient purple glow. Yeah, full spectrum lights allow you to do certain things. Like I can control mine so that it acts like a sunrise and sunset, and extend the grow cycle by manipulating that time frame. So I'm now curious. How long did it take? 6 months. In the field, although the cycle is 6 months, they can only harvest once a year because you need the correct growing conditions. Here we can control the grow. To replicate spring, we've reduced the crop cycle to 3 months. So now you can do 4.
So then higher yields.
Yep. Particularly if you rotate. Yeah, you can do quite a bit more. And you can harvest at any time because it's indoor and protected from the elements. Multiple trials have shown the hops contain more alpha acids per kilogram than those in the field, probably because it's not lost in survival. Depending on if the plant feels threatened, it changes its chemistry. All plants do this in different ways. By summer, 3 grow rooms will be operational with more than 1,000 plants maturing on staggered basis, which is what I just said. So this is really fascinating. This is really, really neat. But 3 months of constant grow monitoring without a crop, 3 months. Yeah, I'd have to have somebody that's like ready and willing to buy. Plus I don't have...
Well, yeah, you can't just throw away all that crop.
Yeah. But I can dry it out and use it in beer making. So So it's pretty neat. This is pretty cool. I like this. And I'm a big proponent of it, even under the impact of this apparent trend of vertical farms kind of going bankrupt or closing outright. But I think it's, again, irrational greed instead of a metered response to the growth.
Well, and so far it's been a lot of startups and small operations, and it's like a lot of other things. There needs to be broader adoption for it to really succeed.
Yep, exactly. Okay, let's keep going. The next article is over in Technology Today. Future nuclear power reactors could rely on molten salts, but what about corrosion? This was a weird article. I chose this because I already know about this. Nuclear power reactors using molten salts. They're solar energy reactors right now. Solar reactors already use molten salts. Over on the way to Las Vegas, you actually can see at least one of them. It had gone bankrupt, but refired, largely again because of research and investor relations. But this says most discussions how to avert climate change focus on solar and wind generation as key to the transition to future carbon-free power system. But these molten salts reactors, they already exist. Nancy W. Stauffer, probably not for nuclear power though, I suppose. But they say, what about corrosion? Well, that's where exotic metallurgy actually comes into play. Pardon me one second.
Oh, so essentially you try to build something out of a non-reactive metal?
Yep. Michael Short, the class of 42 associate professor of nuclear science and engineering at MIT and associate director of the MIT Plasma Science and Fusion Center, is impatient with such talk about climate change and switching to solar and blah, blah, blah. But hey, when you're a hammer, everything is a nail. For decades, researchers have been working on designs for both fission and fusion nuclear reactors using molten salts as fuels or coolants. While those designs promise significant safety and performance advantages, there's a catch. Molten salt and impurities within it often corrode metals, ultimately causing them to crack, weaken, and fail, which you can't have in a nuclear reactor.
No, although you want it to be pretty secure.
The steam one is a whole lot worse because when it fails, it expands massively, and can shatter protective walls or blow the lid off of the reactor, like what happened in Chernobyl. And what happened in Japan was caused by the basically pipes fracturing, and then everything kind of oozed out inside, and the water drained away, etc. Anyway, inside a reactor, key metal components will be exposed not only to molten salt, but also simultaneously to radiation, which generally has a detrimental effect on materials, making them more brittle and prone to failure. Will irradiation make metal components inside a molten salt-cooled nuclear reactor, corrode even more quickly? So essentially, yes, but you have to get certain alloys will corrode more slowly. Changing all of that kind of stuff out, though, see, that really does pose a problem, because what do you do with this contaminated, irradiated
exactly
metal?
I mean, at least they can build new facilities out of something that's perhaps better, but I agree. There's plenty of existing facilities.
Yeah, so they're making they say here, in a reactor, everything is going to be happening at the same time. If you separate the two processes, you're not simulating a reactor, you're doing some other experiment that's not as relevant. So they took to the challenge of designing and building an experimental setup that could do both at once. Short credits a team at University of Michigan for paving the way by designing a device that could accomplish that feat in water rather than molten salts. So their successful setup is an experimental setup of a test chamber that they attach to a proton accelerator. To prepare the test chamber for an experiment, they place it inside a thin disc of a metal alloy being tested on top of a pellet of salt. During the test, the entire foiled disc is exposed to a bath of molten salt. At the same time, a beam of protons bombards the sample from the side opposite the salt pellet, but the proton beam is restricted to a circle in the middle of the foil sample. So then they can see what the results of this are. The results with that arrangement were unchanged from the initial results. They confirmed that the researchers' preliminary findings, supporting their controversial hypothesis that rather than accelerating corrosion, radiation would actually decelerate corrosion in some materials under some conditions. So they just happen to be the same conditions that metals in molten salt cooled reactors will experience. Ta-da!
Well, that's interesting.
So why is it controversial? A close-up look at the corrosion process will be explained. When salt corrodes metal, the salt finds atomic level openings in the solid, seeps in, dissolves salt soluble atoms, pulling them out and leaving a gap in the material, a spot where the material is now weak. So it was entirely because the salt would weaken it, but the radiation stops it. Radiation adds energy to atoms, causing them to be ballistically knocked out of their positions and move very fast. So it makes sense that irradiating a material would cause atoms to move into the salt more quickly, increasing the rate of corrosion. Yet, in some of their tests, the researchers found the opposite to be true, and it's because of the actual alloys stopping it. So I'm not going to get really deep into the metallurgy of this, but there are all kinds of different elements involved in fusing one type of metal to another. Sometimes you need actually explosives to fuse it because they are impossible to bond together, but under high pressure.
Like they don't want to bond.
Yeah, but under high pressure and heat, they do. And various combinations, chemistries allow them to minimize the chemical reactions to both the radiation and the salt, primarily the salt, because the radiation doesn't really do anything if the salt can't penetrate. So, and that's what they found. So pretty neat. And they'll keep on doing the research. And this is where your taxpayer dollars go, folks. Fundamental research that could change the fundamental core of society by removing the cost of power, because we have something defensible and safe and reliable and unending. But it takes time. It takes money. It doesn't happen overnight, you know? So.
No, this is years in the making for this, and it's building off of that other university's research.
Yeah, this person is the class of 42, for crying out loud.
Well, they're the head of the center.
Yeah, I know.
They're like the mentor or whatever, but I know they've probably been researching in this area for years.
It's spawned from them. Yeah. Okay, let's keep going though. This next article, and again, if you're driving to Vegas, if you just look it up, you can look up saltwater solar reactor, or not saltwater, molten salt solar reactor, and you'll pull up pictures of this thing in the desert. I once drove by it, and they had all of the mirrors off axis, and it formed a star out in the middle of the sky right above the desert. It was amazing to see. And I never went back. It's when I ran over an entire, somebody was carrying industrial staples, and I drove through it right after it had fallen off the truck and blew out all 4 of my tires. You're muted. It's okay. The AI does it too.
I think it's the Crescent Dunes solar energy project.
Yeah. Yep. So this next article though is over at the Hacker, and as hackers found a way to open any of 3 million hotel keycard locks in seconds. The company behind the SafeLock brand door locks is offering a fix, but it may take months or years to reach some hotels. Basically, there was some glitch in the matrix that allowed 2 key cards to be tapped against the lock, and it would unlock it.
Wow, doesn't this remind you of the gas card scam?
Oh yeah, that's exactly it. I totally forgot about that, and it was just a couple of days ago. I wonder if it can't be the exact same, but it was basically the same thing. The company behind the SafeLock brand locks are offering a fix, but because of the way that people adopt security, they just think it's somebody else's problem. They don't give a shit about this, and it's not going to get deployed like fanatically. Andy Greenberg over at Wired.com put the article together. But I can summarize because we've talked about this before, and I've read about this in other ways. But when thousands of security researchers descend on Las Vegas every August, when it comes to be known as Hacker Summer Camp, the back-to-back Black Hat and DEF CON hacker conferences, it's given that some will experiment with hacking the infrastructure of Vegas itself, the city's elaborate array of casinos, hospitality. It's basically, when you go to during this time frame, if you go to Las Vegas, leave your phone off. Don't activate a hotspot. Don't log into public Wi-Fi. Just
Is everybody going to try to hack?
Go dark. Yeah. Because I do this. I actually, I used to do this. I used to go to coffee shops and give demonstrations, just to show people that, hey, this is how vulnerable you are. And like, anyway, it's fun. But at one private event in 2022, a select group of researchers were actually invited to hack a Las Vegas hotel room, and they competed with a suite crowded with the laptops and cans of Red Bull and whatnot. And what they ended up doing was finding out that the security system for the doors allowed somebody to specifically code a key code, and it would open any lock that was covered by this safe lock system. It's installed on 3 million doors inside 13,000 properties in 131 countries. And the RFID system Dormakaba uses is known as the MyFire Classic. And Carroll and Waters, the two that demonstrated this, just how easy it was. Their technique starts by obtaining any keycard from the target hotel, say by booking a room and getting a keycard, then reading a certain code from that card with a $300 RFID reader, and then finally writing two key cards of their own, and that all you have to do is tap and off you go. Tap one of the two on the lock. The first rewrites a certain piece of software in the lock's data, and the second one opens it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wonder what the lock-picking lawyer would have to say about this.
A lock-picking lawyer would probably find a different way to physically gain access, because none of the lock-picking lawyer stuff is digital.
That's true. It's all manual techniques.
Yeah, there would be some physical issue with this. You slide a shim in by the door handle and it activates some, because all of it has the same fundamental mechanism. There's an element in there where all you have to do is push it and it disconnects the actual bolt. It's never that complicated. You just have to find a way in. Okay, let's keep racing through the news so that you can enjoy more of this news. The next article is over in Reality Hacker. The world's e-waste has reached a crisis point. The UN report finds that humanity is generating 137 billion pounds of TVs, smartphones, and other e-waste each year, and recycling less than a quarter of it. At Simon, again over at wired.com, put the article together. I won't go through the whole thing. I really do encourage y'all to go over to these articles and read them. I just want to tease you into checking this out. If you can't repair it and you have to discard it, the device will become e-waste, joining an alarming mountain of defunct TVs, refrigerators, washing machines, etc., etc., etc. They call it electrical.
And maybe EV batteries at some point.
Those are already landing in landfills, by the way, and people are going and getting them to recycle them because they're so big. So this electrical and electronic equipment, EEE, should really be pronounced E. Anything with a plug or a battery, it's increasingly out of control. They say here, a new UN report finds that in 2022, humanity churned out 137 billion pounds of e-waste, 17 pounds for every person on Earth. I can't say that I'm one of those. That also represents about $62 billion worth of recoverable materials like iron, copper, gold, hitting e-waste landfills each year. The problem, though, extracting iron, copper, and ore or gold from this e-waste ore is very, very expensive in time and nature, because you need to use caustic chemicals and then pull the stuff out of solution sometimes. It's not as easy as just, let's just, decompose these PC boards. And PC board material is not the friendliest to nature either. Printed circuit board stuff, it's not pretty. At this pace, e-waste will grow to by 33% by 2030, while the recycling rate could decline to 20%. So that's always lovely. And that's really what this article is about. They're talking about what can be recovered, recoverable and non-recoverable metals in e-waste. But again, somebody has to do it. Currently, this stuff gets sent to what's typically referred to as third world countries for mechanical separation, i.e. there's kids and others that are sitting there with clippers cutting off components from PC boards, and then other people are doing, maybe even them too, doing caustic chemical separation. So it has real world impact. All of those devices that you're replacing every year or whatever, it really does have bigger issues.
Yeah, and some of the stuff doesn't get to the destination that it's supposed to. I mean, some manufacturers do have decent recycling programs, but otherwise it's kind of up to the consumer to try to figure out where to send it.
Yeah, and they talk about some of the complicating matters like cobalt, flame retardants, lead. The report found that each year improperly processed e-waste releases more than 125,000 pounds of mercury alone, imperiling the health of humans and other animals, which it may exist in nature, right? There's viruses and whatnot that exist in nature.
Like but anthrax, then, right.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. Anthrax is in the ground. And it's kicked up by horses and cattle and whatnot. But it's not a big deal because our system fights it off, or it isn't aerosolized, right?
It might be in trace amounts, right?
Yeah. Then humans start messing around with it, concentrate it, and then we inhale it somewhere. It might be an accident. It might be released from a government facility. But still, something happens and you have a bad bat situation. Anyway, makes recycling e-waste dangerous occupation. In low and middle income countries, informal e-waste recyclers might go door to door collecting the stuff to extract valuable metals. They melt down components without proper safety equipment, poisoning themselves and the environment. The new report notes that in total, 7.3 billion pounds of e-waste is shipped uncontrolled globally, meaning its ultimate management is unknown and likely not done in an environmentally friendly way. I've seen videos of this happening, and it's definitely children in third world countries that are put in this position. You can be sociopathic and say it's their problem, or you can stand on more solid moral ground and say to the manufacturers of your products, take a pay cut, take a smaller margin, and dedicate it to environmentally responsible recycling procedures. It's not that hard. Speak with your wallet and speak with your brain. It's for your own good. Be a selfish bastard and say, I want my planet healthy for my future and for my kids' future. And I'm not always bringing in kids. Let me tell you, I never want to sit there and go think of the children, but if you're going to sit there and argue it's not my problem, oh, well, I don't want to have children. Again, be sociopathic about it. That's fine. But think of yourself. Do you want to be in a world where it's poisoned by all of this stuff? You jump into a lake one day and you find out later that you're growing a tail because there's so much crap in it. Maybe you'll like the tail. I don't know. Anyway, this article goes much deeper than I'm willing to go into in the show, but I do encourage you to go over and read more about it. Become aware, at least. And willful ignorance isn't an excuse for anything. I've told you about it. If you don't think you know enough, I'm happy to start up another stream about it and talk about it in greater detail. But right now is not the time for it. But I'd be willing to do a show entirely on e-waste. But it might actually end up being a show, an episode that we put together that goes via Patreon, and it's a special. So, okay, let's keep on going though. This next article is over in Technology Today as well, using wood waste products to produce ink for 3D printing of wood objects. I think this is really neat. So the combined team of material scientists at Rice University and Oak Ridge National Laboratory have developed a way to convert wood waste into a type of ink that can be used for the 3D printing of wood-like objects. The paper is published in the journal Science Advances. Bob Yurka from TechExplore put the article together. This is published at techexplore.com. And so this is pretty neat. It looks like it's an actual ink, though, and not what I thought it would have been. I mean, they called it ink to begin with, but I thought that it would be like a 3D printing, more physical, like the filament for a 3D printer, like plastic.
Mm-hmm.
But this looks like it's actually trying to be wood itself.
Mm-hmm.
But there's various things that make up wood. Here, I'll just show you the picture. So lignin and cellulose nanofibers, and then cellulose nanocrystals. Those three combined actually are wood. You can use chemical processes to break down wood into this kind of stuff. This is how you end up with transparent wood. And there's a YouTuber that actually did this. I would never bother doing this. But you can make transparent wood. It's actually translucent, but if you break it into its component parts, then you stick it into a syringe, you can create something that's biodegradable wood. This is pretty neat. I like the idea of this.
Absolutely. Sounds fairly sustainable.
Yep. It says recyclable, so biodegradable at least. Using wood to create objects such as tables and chairs is inefficient. After starting with cut boards or chunks of wood, the material is sawed, shaved, or whatever. Yes, this is extremely inefficient, except that this is what we've always been able to work with, right? Take a big tree, cut it into, I don't know what, table, chairs. So it says to make their ink, the research team first chopped up the material into a fine dust. Then they added chemicals to split the cellulose and lignin apart. Both were broken down further into nanocrystals and nanofibers. Next, the researchers combined the two and added water, resulting in a clay-like mixture, which they used in an ink 3D printer. So it's basically a liquid form of plastic filament, except that it's all natural wood. The team used the ink to create several small objects, such as miniature tables and chairs, and then they used a freeze-drying technique to remove the moisture from the products and then cook them at 180 degrees C to fuse the cellulose and lignin. Okay, it's freeze-dried furniture. Okay, so it's another reason.
New.
It's another reason to get the freeze dryer. Check this out.
Yeah, but I don't think the furniture will fit in there.
We can corner the market on freeze-dried furniture for models.
I think we definitely could.
That's pretty cool. Testing showed the objects up to be 6 times as durable as objects made from the original wood, although the researchers only tested balsa. And that's not a very robust wood. So, but that's really interesting. Because it doesn't have to suffer from the same problems of natural wood, mainly the grain of the wood having to be cured and cut a certain way and faceted together in a certain way. You could theoretically 3D print an entire chair and then freeze dry it. The cost would be, I think, quite high. But if everybody's doing that, and you can custom make it any shape that you can 3D print, then you can make, things that would never be able to be done using natural wood fiber.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely expanding use of existing materials and perhaps from an aesthetic standpoint, expanding what we have available.
I think it comes in brown. AI. I think
well, yeah, that's fair.
Just and zero grain. I think it's just going to be a brown chunk. Hey, what kind of table do you want? Oh, brown chunk. Can we make it lighter? Sure, it's a lighter brown chunk. I'm not selling it.
No, you're not.
That's okay though. Biodegradable from natural wood fibers back into something that's essentially 3D printed wood objects. And if it's waste, then it's saving a whole lot of waste from going to landfills and biodegrading at 1,000 years for it to biodegrade. Okay, so the next article is over in Technology Today. What'll happen when Facebook stops paying for news? Here's what happened when radio stopped paying for music. Dun, dun, dun. So why are musicians so keen to get played on the radio, right? That's what they're asking in this article, along with what happens when Facebook stops paying for news, because news organizations were kind of hammering, certain news organizations were kind of hammering Facebook to say, pay us for the news that you're reporting. Okay, but here's the situation. Peter Martin from The Conversation put the article together. In Australia, they paid at rates so low that let me start from the very beginning. Why are musicians so keen to get played on the radio? It can't be because of money. In Australia, they are paid at rates so low that they come close to making streaming services look generous. Yes, that's what I've always known, and it's been like that. By law, no radio station can be made to pay more than 1% of the station's gross revenue for all of the music it plays, even if it's all music station. By the time the labels have their cut, the artists get a loss. Legislation now before the Senate could remove the ceiling, allowing radio stations and representatives of music artists to negotiate freely, with a final decision made by a tribunal in cases where they can't reach an agreement. So radio pays little for music and always has. That's what I've always known growing up, which is why when I tried to start a streaming service online, I was taken aback by the cost associated with it. Legislation dating back to 1968 has given Australian radio stations a blanket right to play whatever music they want, so long as they negotiate a payment rate. ABC pays half a cent per person. The ceiling only applies to radio stations, only to the recordings. Television stations, including ABC stations, pay much more per track. It's typically called a sync license. And composers who are paid separately with no legislated limit get much more. This means that composers of You're the Voice get paid quite well, but the performer, John Farnham, does not. The record industry has tried time and time again to remove the ceiling. In 2010, it went to the High Court, arguing along the lines of the case depicted in the movie The Castle, that the Constitution prevented the Commonwealth from acquiring property other than on just terms. Just is very subjective. The High Court said no, finding copyright wasn't property, which is really interesting here in the States. It's definitely aligned with property. What's that? AI? Are you?
I'm just trying to figure out how this has allowed any industry to transpire, because it just seems so lopsided.
Well, it's kind of interesting. There's no way to know who the listener is on radio. They just broadcast it out. So they don't know who's receiving it. So how do you get a fair rate if you don't know what the listening expanse is? Right? So you basically have to argue for the lowest value. And if you have a good attorney representing you, even into the into the court system at the state level or government level, right? You basically have to say, we don't know who we're broadcasting to, who's listening at any given moment. They could flip by for a half second. Depending on what you are doing, any little bit of listening to a song counts as a listen. And so, for instance, I would have to keep track of everybody that's in chat, everybody that downloads the podcast, anybody that downloads the VOD over on Twitch or YouTube or wherever.
Right. I mean, it's a lot of tracking.
Yeah. And by the way, that isn't allowed even under the licensing that I had been paying for, that synchro license is separate. Bunk. So like in certain places I can play music live, but I can't play it while it in the recorded video. So when radio called the label's bluff, a disc jockey quoted at the time said he didn't think the average listener would notice, and there's nothing on record to suggest the average listener did. The Beatles' album Let It Be was released on May 8th. The record ban, as it was called, came into force on May 16th. The Long and Winding Road cracked the top 5 just about everywhere it was released, apart from Australia. 5 months later, the record companies caved. The only thing the radio industry offered was a guaranteed number of advertisements per week. So, advertise our stuff. There are certain things that the radio, particularly in the United States, demands. Like, you can't play the entire album in order. You can't play more than the same, a certain number of songs from the same artist, and you can't do anything on demand. If somebody calls your radio station, you can't.
Right. Yeah, it's very regimented.
Yep. And you have to keep an accounting. So the common theme is that, as unfair as it seems, platforms have an awful lot of power over providers. If Kohl's and Woolworths say no, fruit growers won't be able to distribute their product. If radio stations say no, artists won't be as widely disseminated. And if Facebook and its ilk say no, news sites will get fewer clicks. Facebook has been paying millions of dollars to Australian news sites since the News Media Bargaining Code began in 2021. In February, it said the agreements expire and will pay no more. And the code allows the government to force Facebook to pay, but only if it continues to link to news, and it has given every indication it won't. And I think that it's absurd, because there isn't anything that is written in a vacuum. For instance, even Peter Martin from The Conversation got its news from somewhere. It's linking to certain information. There are investigative journalists, but nothing is ever done in a vacuum. And that sharing of the knowledge is really key to raising awareness. And so I would have a real problem with somebody saying you have to pay just to link to news. It just seems an absurdity. It would be like me being told I have to pay to sit there and say, hey, you should go to techexplore.com or to theconversation.com in a conversation between two people. The website is nothing more than a tool to facilitate this exchange of an idea. Hey, go and look at that news. You will suss something out from it different than what I did. Which is essentially why I even do the shows, is because I want people to be attracted to the news and then go over to the source.
Right. You want them to read it from the original source, not only come to ohmTown.
Yeah. And you don't know what you don't know. So I try to make the show entertaining, and I try to link people to the actual source information, because all I ever get from the source is whatever they provide. Right. I don't take the whole article, and neither should Facebook, neither should anybody. You should always take what they're willing to give you, and then you link to them, because there's a whole lot more in this article that I did not read. You'll have to go over there to read it. And so our last article for Technology Today is in the Technology Today channel over on ohmTown.com. It will link you to the source, just like all of our little snippets do. New model makes it easier to build sustainable structures of textile reinforced concrete. And I chose this because there was there was a video that popped up in my newsfeed today about a concrete pier landing on a beach in Los Angeles. And people are like, what? How the hell can concrete be floating onto a beach from a storm? And well, I said that it's I'm sorry, it's not necessarily real concrete. It might be encapsulated, I should say, the foam encapsulated in concrete blocks, and then they're bonded together. Or it could be foamcrete, which is much lighter concrete. And this article is over at Tech Explorer, I believe. By reinforcing concrete with textiles instead of steel, it is possible to use less material and create slender, lightweight structures with a significantly lower environmental impact. The technology to utilize carbon fiber textiles already exists, and it's been challenging, among other things, to produce a basis for reliable calculations for complex and vaulted structures. So the article is over at Chalmers University of Technology, but it's published at techexplore.com. Researchers from Chalmers University of Technology in Sweden, it might be Chalmers, present a method that make it easier to scale up analysis and thus facilitate the construction of more environmentally friendly bridges, tunnels, and buildings. You know what? I think Sweden is one of those countries that have this awesome building technique where they put a truck inside a tunnel and they can build the road over the top of that truck. And when the truck drives away, everything settles in place like a keystone arch would just lock into place. And then they can build the road on top of it. I think Sweden,
oh, wow. I mean, that's very sophisticated.
I think it's Sweden that does this too, but don't hold me to that, folks. But it's a neat technology. Anyway, a great deal of concrete we use today has the function to act as a protective layer to prevent the steel reinforcement from corroding. If we can use textile reinforcement instead, we can reduce cement consumption and also use less concrete and thus reduce the climate impact. Again, concrete comes back to haunt us. Great building material, very robust and survivable, various catastrophic events in nature, etc. But it is a greenhouse gas emitter. Anyway, not all of that was said by Karen Lundgren, who is a professor at
right.
a professor in concrete structures at the Department of Architecture and Civil Engineering at I think it's Chalmers. Anyway, cement is a binder in concrete, and its production from limestone has a large impact on the climate. One of the problems is that the large amounts of carbon dioxide that have been sequestered in the limestone are released during production and throughout its existence. Cement and concrete in general off gas. So they're talking about using a carbon fiber material instead of cement.
So it's gonna be lighter, and so it might float like the thing on the floating pier.
Depending on its actual weight, yeah, I mean it's definitely a possibility. You can actually form it in a way that it displaces water, and it can act. You can make a cement bathtub, and when you place it in water, if it displaces enough water, it'll float. You can make a barge out of cement and fill it with other stuff as long as it displaces enough water. It can be heavier than the water. It just needs to displace enough and it'll stay afloat. The wrong amount of weight in it and some water sink into it and you'll have a bathtub at the bottom of the ocean. But anyway, the study that was published in journal Construction and Building Materials, and Karen Lundgren and her colleagues described a new modeling technique that was proved to be reliable in analysis describing how textile reinforcement interacts with concrete. The paper is titled Textile Reinforced Concrete Members Subjected to Tension, Bending, and In-Plane Loads, Experimental Study and Numerical Analyses. I think it's great. So instead of using cement, they used carbon fiber reinforcement. It says a previous research study from the University of Cambridge showed that textile reinforcement can reduce carbon dioxide emissions by up to 65% compared to traditional solid floors. Also, when it's rebar reinforced, any water that actually ends up making contact with that rebar could cause oxidation, causing it to rust. When it rusts, it expands. When it expands, it causes a blowout of the cement, and then you have structural failure. That's actually what led to the hotel or the condo apartment in or the condo building in Florida collapsing, um, mainly because moisture. So cement concrete is not impervious to water. You have to waterproof it. But if water does get in, it seeps through eventually because it's porous. So it's not like this stuff can stop water without being massively thick and the water being redirected internally. Eventually, it will come all the way through. Salt actually amplifies that effect. Salt water touching iron rebar will cause it to fail even spectacularly.
Like with traditional concrete building, I mean, there has been the benefit of years of observation, whether that's necessarily the best way to do it, right? Like you can see existing structures, see what happens to them under different conditions. For something like this, I'm assuming it's been tested in small scale only and not over a long-term duration.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, they'll scale it up though, and test it, and they can test it in a more um,
I
uh,
guess like more extreme conditions, right? Like in a
correct.
lab or something.
Yeah, gone are the days where they have to see it in nature for 20 years, although certain science does. But they can stress it and do the calculations. They can do all kinds of research around its survivability under various stresses. That's kind of what they were saying right up here: tension bending and in-place loads. So they take it and they twist it and they push it for compaction and they put a load on it to see how much weight it can actually withstand compared to its predecessors. And then they change what the ratio is. Maybe this will be thicker, or less of them or more of them, because
Or more closely packed or any
or
number of
further away.
variables.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
really, there is a happy medium in the structure itself, and it could be as precise as, depending on the dimensions that you're requesting, it has to be a certain ratio within it. So it's not as easy as just saying, okay, it's a 2-to-1 ratio. But they'll hash it all out before it hits the market. But we're slowly taking advantage of the science that preceded and then advancing it into something that's deployable. It all comes down to money, folks. Hopefully, people see this good and they make it a reality and they don't just go, oh, I'm going to be filthy rich, let's jack the price up. Yeah.
No, I agree. I mean, and hopefully we do see. We were talking about basically donating if you actually that was in continuity report where we were talking about that, but like hopefully some people with significant resources start putting it toward technologies like this.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, that's it for today, folks. We get back into the party bus, the ohmTown News party bus, and we race down Main Street and we revisit Technology Today's main page. Depending on the show, I have this main page zoomed in 20%. So when you actually see it, it looks like that. And so oh, and I just got logged out. Anyway, the only way you see certain things is if you become a citizen. So sign up, it's really easy. And then you'll have the ability to hide and save links that you read throughout the day. You can actually go into each one of these channels. Each one of these channels is a show that I intend to bring to ohmTown along with the sentient AI above. In fact, we have one more show tonight. It's going to start in about 15 minutes. We'll probably, maybe kind of, whenever I say that I'm going to get this done fast, it never ends up fast. Like, we're running late already. But I want to respect your time and I want to provide you a bunch of news. But in about 10 minutes, I'm going to have reset so that we can do a show called Four Wheel Tech, which focuses on the automotive industry and technology surrounding it. Just like the other shows, it's news related. We have 10 articles that we've already selected. over the last week. It will be a weekly show, just like Technology Today is. The only one that is a daily show is ohmTown Daily News Show, which is holistic and takes news from all across ohmTown.com. Stick around. We are going to reset. So we're going to go offline. And that actually allows us to stop the recording. We don't edit. You see exactly what we see. You hear exactly what we say. I think there's only been one time where I've now edited the video post delivery, and that's because YouTube flagged it for a copyright violation, even though I'm licensed to use the music. And other derpy things like Nintendo has said something because I played a trailer for their own thing that's publicly available.
Right, promoting it.
Yeah, and others have promoted it, and the same thing with Netflix has done the same thing. Other people have promoted it, but apparently I wasn't allowed to. It was weird. So anyway, enough grousing. That's it for tonight for Technology Today. Again, 10 minutes. We'll have reset. So I hope you come back if you're in chat. Otherwise, see you next time. I'm Merwat. That's Technology Today, but ohmTown.com powers it. And up there is the sentient AI that's waiting patiently for me to shut up.
Good night, hometown citizens. Come back soon for 4 World Tech.
Bye-bye.